Yo, how's it going, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Now, I wanted to go ahead and make this video really quick. Earlier in the day, I made a video pretty much talking about the fact that Charles Oliveira is going to be facing off against Rafael Fiziev. And in that video, I pretty much briefly mentioned that the way the UFC announces fights now is so lame compared to the way that they used to do it. Back in the day, we definitely did see a lot more passion from the UFC. The UFC actually cared. They gave a fuck. Nowadays, I mean, it's kind of hard to pretty much, feel the soul from the UFC now. I feel like every day or every year as the years go on, we're pretty much witnessing the UFC soul wither away. It seems like ever since they signed that TKO deal, the product of the UFC has been going to shit, if I'm just being completely honest. Let me give you guys some perspective. Charles Oliveira is one of the biggest fighters in Brazil. He is one of the greatest fighters in Brazilian history. Huge fan base, without a doubt. Like a lot of people, especially when people started watching the UFC throughout like the COVID era, he gained like such a huge freaking fan base. It would be so easy for the UFC to put like a couple bands down. They need to put freaking bands down into an edit, and just pay a freaking TikToker or some shit to create an edit for Charles Oliveira to pretty much promo his ass, that the fact that he's going to be facing off against Rafael Fiziev in Brazil. But no, the way that we find out about fights nowadays is logging into freaking X or logging into freaking Instagram, YouTube, or Facebook. And that's the way that we find out about fights nowadays. And it's just so freaking ass. Remember when the UFC actually cared? When they actually had a soul? They actually freaking put effort into providing the fans with, future banger of fights. And nowadays we have Dana White's bald ass logging into freaking Instagram Live and announcing some of the biggest fights in UFC history, via Instagram Live. I just think it's just so freaking low effort. It's so freaking mediocre. And every year since I started making YouTube, it's been getting worse. The UFC product has just been going to shit. And we all feel it. I definitely do feel it. But it's just something that I've noticed, and I don't know why it took me so long for me to just make a video about it, but it just bothers me so much that nowadays we have these huge fights that have the potential to have, an insane freaking hype behind them, but for whatever reason the UFC just doesn't give that to us. It just doesn't do it for me anymore, and I feel like there's a lot of people out there that probably feel the same way. And obviously people are still gonna stick around to watch. People are probably gonna, stick around and, watch the fight anyways, and they could care less about the hype. But the hype around the fight for future fights, it just makes the date, you know, m- more of a reason to look forward to it. And I just think that us logging into X and Instagram and finding out about a big fight is not the best way to go about it. I feel like the UFC should bring back a little bit of their soul, a little bit of their effort, put some freaking bands down and pay some of my TikTok boys to make a couple edits for them, and I think things would be fine and dandy. Now, the UFC, they used to put a lot more effort when announcing fights. They used to actually create promos. Nowadays, they have Dana White's bald ass going live in the war room, reading off a script that we could definitely tell that Dana White's like reading a freaking whiteboard or some shit, announcing fights from fighters that he doesn't even seem to even recognize. Like, how many times have you guys seen Dana White mispronounce a fighter's last name that were just like, bro, like he's one of the biggest fighters in the UFC right now. How the fuck do you not know how to pronounce his last name? Anyways, that's just my 2 cents. The UFC definitely used to put a lot more effort into announcing fights. For whatever reason, that just went away, and it is what it is now. But I definitely do hope that they change that. I do hope that things go back to the way it used to be, because ever since I started making YouTube videos, it just kind of it seems like ever since they signed that TKO deal, like the product of the UFC kind of has been going to shit, if I'm being honest.